With a population of over 80 million people, a booming export-driven economy and the EU's lowest unemployment rate, Germany remains the undisputed powerhouse of Europe. But to what extent has Angela Merkel sought to impose her views on the rest of Europe? What role does France play in the so-called Franco-German tandem? Welcome to Talking Europe on France 24. Noël Lenoir, welcome to the show.
Hi.
You're a lawyer, a former French Europe minister that was under President Chirac, if I'm not mistaken, and essentially you're the chair of HEC's European think tank, HEC, the Haute École de Commerce, being Europe's leading business school. Also with us, Pierre-Yves Le Borgne, welcome. You're a member of the French Socialist Party. You're a French MP representing the French living in Germany, Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and I believe you live in Germany, in Cologne.
I work in Germany. My parliamentary office is in Köln.
In Cologne, that's in the west of Germany. Last but not least, also with us, Yves Bertoncini. You're the director of the Paris-based Jacques Delors Institute, a leading think tank on European affairs. Noël Lenoir, first of all, there is this common perception, I should say, that Germany is the driving seat. Germany is imposing its economic model on the rest of Europe, strict fiscal discipline, some call it austerity, coupled with liberal market reforms. Do you agree with that?
On the contrary, I think that Mrs. Merkel in particular is one of the most pro-European leaders in Europe now, because she knows how to compromise, which is at the basis of the European governance, as you know. First of all, she has accepted a plan to give aids to the states, those who were bankrupt. She recently accepted that France does not respect what it had promised, that is to say, to reduce the budget deficit before just now. And
yeah, the Commission gave France more time to meet its targets.
The ECB, the European Bank, is free to lead its own politics, and especially the quantitative easing was not at all the cup of tea of Mr. Schäuble, who is much more rigorous than Mrs. Merkel. I think that she knows how to compromise. The Germans
are very wary of the ECB printing money.
She knows how to compromise, and perhaps, unfortunately, she doesn't succeed to export the German model of economy, which has some defects, of course. But it's a strong economy, and what is very encouraging now is that the French have decided, the President of the Republic, the Prime Minister, well, to go along with this idea of economic recovery and more rigor in the management of public expenditure.
Mr. Bertoncini, do you agree with Mrs. Lenoir that there is no problem with this perceived Deutsche Übermacht, this German dominance in Europe?
Well, de facto, German results are good. Economically, socially, budgetary speaking, they are good. And in addition, if you look at the bailout programs made to Greece, for example, they have lent more money than the others, precisely because of their economic weight. But having said this, it's fair to admit that their starting point was not really respected. I mean, they made compromises. And I would even add not only the ECB...
Quantitative easing...
Yes, but also you could even add banking union. Banking union, at first stance, they were not in favor of banking union.
It was a French idea.
And then, yes, and in reality, if you look at the EMU governance in general, the Euro area summit at the level of heads of state, they were totally against. And if we look at the situation backwards, I mean, they accepted a lot of compromises. But that is why, of course, it has costed politically. It explains, for example, the emergence of the Alternative for Deutschland party in Germany. And then, of course, having accepted such compromises, they are still in a position to say, look at that. Well, now, where are the counterparts? That's fair.
Mr. Le Borgne, what's the perception in Germany when a number of countries, not least Greece, I think we'll get to talk about Greece more specifically, portray Angela Merkel as the sheriff of Europe?
I believe that the Germans feel that they went through a lot of sacrifices in the early years of the century, And when it comes to helping countries in disarray, they're not necessarily against that, but they want to see compromises from the other end, from these countries, guaranteeing the German government that debts would be paid back and that people would stick to their decisions made in the Council of the European Union, which is why very often there is a doubt in Germany that the Greeks are to be taken seriously, unfortunately.
Now, let's talk about the Franco-German couple or tandem. It has long been the driving engine of Europe. In what state is the Franco-German couple?
Well, what we can see is that, as usual, at the beginning, the two leaders, when they don't know each other rather well, it was the case with Adenauer and de Gaulle as well, and especially with regard to Chirac and Schröder, at the beginning, they don't go along very well. And at the end of the day, they do, as is the case now, especially, I think, because they managed the Ukrainian crisis rather well together.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Merkel was once again quite courageous because, as you know, German companies and the German Association of Employers was very much against sanctions to Russia. So I think that it's a couple which works. It works quite well. What doesn't work as well is that there is no yet any political project for the future of Europe because of the shock of the rejection of the referendum in France in 2005. Europe is an utopia. It's a market, but it's an utopia which has become reality, and we need to have a project.
And many say the problem is France is willing to play a role, but because the French economy at the moment is pretty weak vis-à-vis Germany, France is very much overshadowed by Berlin.
Yeah, but I totally agree. If you look at the situation, the economic, social and budgetary situation, the relation is not balanced at all. France did not put its own house in order, let's say. So what I've said previously is that when you look at the village, the European village, the way it should work, there were many evolutions pushed by France and accepted by Germany. But still, if we look at the French house and the German house, yes, France did not put his own house in order. I mean, the unemployment rate is twice than the one we can see in Germany, more than 10 versus less than 5. The growth prospects are not that bad, but inferior to the one we can see in Germany. And given the demographic situation, of course, it's not good enough for France if we look at the
exports
deficits. But having said this, if we take a broader picture, including external relations, the fight against terrorism, defense efforts, then the relation is more balanced because then at this level, at the external level, France is much more proactive, and sometimes Germany, maybe with the exception of Ukraine, Germany is rather shy, too shy.
On foreign policy. What is the perception in Germany? Do the Germans at last trust your party, the Socialist Party? Do they trust this new socialist government now embodied by Valls and the economy minister Emmanuel Macron?
I believe the German government does trust Manuel Valls and his government. I went with Valls to Germany back in September. And we went to visit the Chancellor. We went to visit Hamburg also, where Valls could eventually met with the BDI, the German Employers Federation, and laid out the plans that we have to rebalance the economy. And that was, I think, well perceived. To what extent does that resonate into the German population? That's probably a second question, which I think the French government should tackle much more proactively than it has done it to date.
So you're telling me that the French government should know how to sell itself better to its partners?
Yeah, because there is a tendency in France to believe that Germany is Berlin. And Germany is a collection of 16 Länder.
That's true.
Highly decentralized country.
Yeah, and I mean, that has been part of my internal lobbying in the parliamentary majority to push French ministers to go to places and cities such as Stuttgart, and Munich, and not only Frankfurt and Berlin, but really see the real economy, and especially in the south, talking about the Mittelstand.
the SMEs,
Exactly.
small and medium-sized companies. Now, we're going to talk about this and maybe some food for thought for our German friends, our German viewers. Who says that the French can't think outside the box? More than 10% of French people are out of job. That's true. It's the highest level in at least 16 years. But we explore some original ways in which support is being given to people trying to get back into the job market. Let's watch our report.
Checking out the sales figures today at Duplicard. Soon they'll be putting out a new catalogue in this graphic design company. Everyone's hard at work.
My task for this week is to finalize a customer satisfaction survey. I'm doing accounting. I'm working in budgeting and finance.
My main task is compiling work contracts and pay slips.
A seemingly typical small business. There's just one difference. Everyone here is unemployed.
It's a virtual company, but with real work. We use the infrastructure and equipment you would find in any normal company, like a real business.
There are 110 fake companies like this one throughout France. A huge network which allows for this elaborate role play between clients and suppliers on a national scale. No money, no products, but close enough. And a boss played by the trainer.
It has updated my skill set. But more than that, practicing every day really helps me a lot.
Each virtual business focuses on the local economy in its area. Here in the southern Ardèche region, that means tourism. This fake travel company is partially financed by the local government. Hundreds have completed its training since it was created in 2012. These job seekers continue to receive their benefits checks. Patricia is getting back in the saddle.
Imagine Tourisme Ardèche, Patricia, bonjour.
She has been unemployed for 3 years.
We are already in the middle of things. We work for real. We're in the flow of things.
Feeling out of the flow of things was what Emily Laurette missed most when she was unemployed. Today she works in communications for this hospital. Her time in a virtual company changed everything.
I could hit the ground running because I got used to having a work routine.
These companies may be imaginary, but the results are solid. 7 in 10 of those trained find a job.
Noir, as you can see, some in France are ready to fight to get back into the job market. More broadly speaking, we know that the Socialist Party has unveiled a number of reforms. Some call them liberal reforms. Does it show that Angela Merkel has won the ideological battle in Europe?
Well, I think that it's not a question of Angela Merkel, but I think that a country like France, which wants to fight against unemployment, has to be much more business-friendly. Our culture is based on the state. We are a statist country, based on the administration. We're very good engineers, good researchers. Transfer of technology is bad, and we are not business-friendly. And I hope that we imitate the German with regards to training of young people, and also that we give the taste to these young people. Some are very courageous. They create startups or they work a lot, but some are discouraged. And I hope that in this respect, we look at what is done in Germany to help young people to find a job as soon as they go out of university or of school.
Many in Germany believe that the recent economic recovery of countries like Ireland, to a certain extent Spain, although unemployment remains very high, shows that Germany was right to believe in what some call austerity, others fiscal discipline. Is that your view?
Well, if you take the examples of Ireland and Spain, in reality, these two countries faced a serious banking crisis, real estate bubbles, and then it exploded, and then they have to cope with such crisis. They are still fighting against it, but it's true that for Ireland, they received a bailout plan with, yes, structural reforms to be implemented, and then it worked, and finally. Yes, it worked in Ireland, but it's also working in Portugal, where the starting situation was far different. I think there are differences in the situation of departure, and then different outcomes depending on the reforms implemented. Just one word to say that it's not an ideological fight only. Because if so, we could have said that the adoption of the minimum wage in Germany was a victory of French socialism in Germany, or at least under the influence of the SPD, probably. But it
Junior
was,
partner, the Social
It was a more
Democrats.
pragmatic decision, and I think, in fact, some solutions have to be adopted to each country depending on their situation and traditions.
And last but not least, if there is one country where austerity has clearly failed for the right or wrong reasons, it has to be Greece. Do you believe that Angela Merkel and Alexis Tsipras will find some common ground in the coming weeks?
I hope so, especially for Tsipras, because there is no other solution than finding a European solution. And in order to achieve that, Tsipras has to come up with a list of reforms that have been demanded for quite some time, ever since he took office. And we haven't seen the color of these reforms yet. I hope Tsipras comes to reality, because otherwise, what is the future of Greece?
And the centre-left governments of France and Italy are on the same line as the German Chancellor, in your view?
Yes, yes. I mean, a country like France lended, if I correctly remember, 41 billion euros.
Yes.
As a French member of parliament, I want to see that money back one way or another.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre-Yves Le Borgne, Yves Bertoncini, and of course, Noël Lenoir for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. Now, please stay with me. I'll return just after the news break in about 10 minutes on France 24.